So, shall we attempt to talk about the flight model in Elite Dangerous and flight assist off? This could start a heated debate. I guess one of the hotly discussed topics for any newcomer to Elite Dangerous is the flight model and understanding it, and lots of gripes about it. Get your head around the fact that it's not a Newtonially accurate flight model, and you'll be fine. Frontier have been very open about it. You know, it's written to be a game, to be playable, to be interesting, to have certain challenges and nuances that make it an interesting flight model to play. It's not going to change. It might be balanced here and there, but I really don't suspect it's going to change significantly. Frontier have been quite clear about that. So once you get your head around that fact, that, you know, if you want to have something Newtonially accurate, go and play Kerbal Space Program. There's some great videos by Scott Manley. In fact, I'll put a link in if I can remember. Shooting! Go and watch that video, and that'll tell you all about Newtonian physics. Elite Dangerous, then, it's kind of an atmospheric kind of flight model in a way. You've got stuff that doesn't make sense, like top speed limits on a spaceship. You know, it's clear that there's not going to be any craft that can go faster than 500 meters per second, for example, which is really down to the mechanics of a multiplayer, apparently. So I've invested in a little training model. It's cost a lot of money, this has. A nice little A-wing, Lego A-wing, obviously, just to kind of summarise the kind of mechanics of it. Now, don't forget, your ship can move in all sorts of directions, and it can spin and rotate, and all of these are mappable to controls on a joystick, throttle, keyboard, mouse, pedals, whatever you want. And it's probably fair to say, you know, if you've got a decent controller, it will pay dividends, really. I can't imagine playing the game purely on keyboard. Now, what we're going to assume before we go into this flight assist off discussion is really that you kind of know the basics. So you need to really know about you need to know how that's limited. You need to know about the blue zone, the sweet spot as they call it, on your speed indicator, and how your ship is more manoeuvrable. And if you don't know any of that, then I did a video about this previously, which again I'll put a link into, a magic link there. Go and watch that one first, so that we've got all the basics out of the way. So you should be understanding now about the idea of not yawing to a target, but having to roll and pitch up onto target as being much more effective. But you'll also appreciate yaw for fine-tuning your aim, and you'll know all about sort of top speeds and manoeuvrability in that blue zone and stuff like that. Okay, so let's go and have a look at some of the concepts around flight assist off and where it works first. Non-combat, one of the things that I use it for is kind of being able to traverse straight distances in space with minimal power usage, and therefore keeping your heat down.
So we're on approach to all in, and what I'm going to do is disengage flight assist, and then I'm going to turn my engines off and reduce my throttle to 0. And then what we're effectively doing here is we're kind of floating. Now obviously without engines, any kind of change to your flight path is very minimal, but you can see the heat starts dropping down significantly on your head-up display here, down to 16%, 14, as you can see. So this can give you a kind of a good way of flying through space without generating too much heat, but obviously it does rely on you not having to really perform any significant manoeuvres. But I can, often approach stations like this, particularly in premium beta, when people are ganking around outside the front of it. But just make sure you turn your engines back on before you make your final approach. What you can do is with timing, there we go, click flight assist back on, and it fights that momentum and corrects it, and you can just time it right and kind of line up with the slot and do your final approach.
So by doing this, we can shut systems down. We can literally float in space without using up power to fire engines, and I find that's kind of a useful tactic. It's useful for approaching stations or travelling distances, but I can't really see it being the be all and end all. Now, other people talk about about flight assist off being some kind of panacea for combat manoeuvrability. So one of the first things we need to dismiss is that your craft turns any quicker with flight assist off than with it on. And by turn I mean actually kind of manoeuvre in a pitch or a roll kind of motion. Yeah, it doesn't at all, and here's the proof.
So we're going to use Nirvana here as a reference point, and you can see I'm here in maximum manoeuvrability zone, the blue zone, and I'm going to pull a complete loop there with flight assist on, and that comes out at 10 seconds. So any quicker with flight assist off. So I'll turn it off, zero my throttle, maintain that speed, and start the same turn. Now obviously we're drifting through space now rather than pulling a loop, if you like, but in terms of times it takes to spin the craft, it was no different. Take word for it. You can count the seconds if you want to. Exactly the same. So the ship is no quicker to actually spin on its axis.
So any advantage you're going to get from flight assist off in combat has to come around either lower usage of power from engines, not building up heat by firing your engines much, or being able to kind of do this drift, being able to point in one direction but still sort of fly in another. Now this is all fine and good, and what we'll do is we'll try some of this, but here's my critical point, I think, is that with a decent controller setup, now what I've got here, for example, is I've got an analog stick here which controls my vertical and lateral thrusters. I can manoeuvre my ship sideways and upwards and downwards and backwards at the same time very easily without needing flight assist off, and I don't have to be fighting the lack of any computer assistance to keep myself pointed on a target. If you haven't got that level of controls, then maybe flight assist off would offer some benefit if you could keep that accurate with it. But as we will see in a second, being accurate with fixed weapons in particular is nigh on impossible with flight assist off. I'm sorry, I don't believe anybody can really keep a weapon on target with flight assist off. Gimbaled weapons obviously ease that pain a little bit, but as you will see, I'm not entirely convinced that flight assist off 100% through combat is very effective.
So in this first example we're just playing single player mission against Crimson Triumph, isn't it? And I'm going to attempt this with flight assist permanently off. Now I've got you're on roll enabled here, so it is incredibly hard to point fixed weapons on your target using a stick. Now I'm sure with a lot of practice I can get better, but you know, fighting that control model and trying to get fixed weapons on target is frustratingly difficult, let alone trying to perform any combat maneuvers while I'm in the middle of it. I mean, here I am, I'm kind of floating backwards, which is no bad thing, you know. But certainly in this case, the yaw on roll really is more of a hindrance than anything. Which is kind of why I'd really like to see an option where yaw on roll, if for those who use it, is enabled, but as soon as you disengage flight assist, the yaw on roll feature turns off. That would, in my mind, be quite useful. And you've then still got the optional button you can set to engage yaw. You can have a little hold down button. It's a feature already. But you can see here at this distance, I ain't got a hope in hell of shooting this guy. And just about get it to the point here where I'm getting some shots on him. The damage is done really. Shields are out and my hull ain't looking pretty. I'll try my best. So I'm using some vertical thrusting there to negate that that motion. kind of almost get away with a bit of a sideways manoeuvre there. But the thing is, I can do pretty much these manoeuvres with flight assist on, with the right controls. Now with a gimbaled weapon, you know, I'm pointing in roughly the right direction, so it's probably nowhere near as bad. But unfortunately, this mission doesn't let me play with a gimbal. So okay, I think I'll try it without you're on roll. So we can go into controls and we can change that you're on roll to off. Get back in there. And does that lack of any introduced yaw on my stick make things easier? Well, it does from a control perspective. It's one less axis that you're having to worry about controlling. But the problem now, of course, is that you've lost the ability to fine-tune your aim left or right. So now I've got no way of just nudging slightly to the left without yaw. And so this is kind of what I've said many a time, which is why yaw is very important. It's just not impossible to do accurate aiming of a fixed weapon without it. You see, I'm trying to roll one way or the other, I'm over-correcting, and it's just all over the shop. And I've got very little chance of getting this weapon to bear on this guy. Now, of course, you don't have to use yaw on roll. You can map yaw to a button, pedals, whatever suits you. But really, this is just pointing out that purely from a flight control perspective, flight assist off with no yaw is a bit easier, because you're not having to cancel out that yaw motion at all. But from a combat perspective, not very helpful. But again, fine if you've got gimbals, you know. And I've said this many a time. Starting to sound like a stuck record, aren't I? I do apologise. So we just about managed to get some shots on him now, but it's kind of a rarity really, and it's all a bit late. So in reality, what do most people do? They temporarily disengage flight assist off, just to start your turns basically. So here we are, we're flying mainly with flight assist on, but then you can quickly tap assist off, orientate yourself roughly in the direction, re-engage it, and get the control back of flight assist. And this probably gets you all of the important benefits you need, but you know, you can preempt a turn. Spin around, going a little bit too fast here, I'm a little bit out of the blue zone, but re-engage it, turn around, and it allows you to kind of drift and get some distance from your target and not follow that predictable flight curve really. Yeah, you can see I can just use some vertical thrusting down to give myself a loop around the target, and then this is just far more effective. Okay, I'm just using yaw to fine-tune that, but it's all about balancing that pitch up and that thrust down. There you go. And just for completeness, with flight assist on, which in reality is how I play things most of the time. Downward slipping, you see you can carry that momentum without too much problem by just providing some downward thrust, and the flight model kind of carries you along that line really. It doesn't fight to thrust you back forward again towards your target. So we're doing this kind of usual loopy business. Always striving to keep in that blue zone. This kind of keeps you at a nice distance using that yaw. Means you don't have to worry too much about lining them up vertically. So manoeuvring with flight assist off can be useful. I mean, here we've got a target that's not really making any evasive manoeuvres, so you can at this point notice I vertically thrust downwards to cancel out that motion. So you've got to watch that space dust and see what your direction is, and then in this instance it's thrusting down or now forward to cancel out that motion and close my distance with him. But you know, if they're not moving, if they're not pulling any serious evasive manoeuvres, it's fairly easy to follow the target with flight assist off like this. So you can drift along, you can point your ship in one direction, and if you had gimbaled weapons or you're a good fixed shot on flight assist off, which I'm not entirely sure is possible, then it'd be quite practical. But in reality, nobody flies in a straight line like that and allows you to shoot them. But you know, maybe there will be instances where this will be useful in the final game. Big, slow, poorly manoeuvring ships that you can just drift along next to.
So, you know, flight assist off, I don't think is this magic silver bullet that's going to end all of your combat woes. There are distinct merits for it in certain kind of rather specific scenarios, but don't get too worked up about not being able to use or master flight assist off. As a left-on device, I'm yet to be convinced that anybody flies anything 100% flight assist off all the time, except in kind of general manoeuvrability or making fancy YouTube videos, that sort of thing. Fair enough, but from a gameplay kind of combat perspective, at least, certainly with fixed weapons, I can't see it being practical in the slightest bit. What you might want to consider, if you're not getting on with it, is look at something like GlovePie to script your controls. One thing I find is that with a decent setup of controllers, particularly analog thrusters, I've got this like stick here that allows me to kind of do my lateral thrusting in an analog fashion, yeah, so I can thrust a little bit or a lot. If you're using a button, you've obviously not got that control, it's all or nothing. Maybe look to something like GlovePie to script your controller into a virtual analog joystick where you can control how much thrust it's applying. I used this in the early alpha days when I didn't have this throttle, and it was very effective. I basically set it up as a virtual joystick that when I pressed a button to slide sideways, it only applied maximum of 50% thrust in any direction, so that I didn't go out of that sweet spot, and you could literally hold the button there. So you know, there are tools out there that can help you make the most of that. If you don't have to splash out on fancy controls for that. But yeah, don't you know, it has its place, but it's not going to. It's kind of like the final 2% of the game, maybe flight assist off. And if you don't learn it and master it, really, I wouldn't worry about it. If somebody's beating you, it's probably not because they're permanently in flight assist off. It's just that they've got a more powerful ship, they shot at you first, they've got better controllers, better spatial awareness, so they're just better at the game than you. Just get out there and enjoy it. Okay, right, there's some opinions. Let's get out there in standard beta tomorrow and have some fun. I shall see you later. Have a good one.